Well, hello everybody. Brian here, out in my shop today. I wanted to take a few minutes to put together a video on how to remove print lines. I know this is something that many people have talked about online. There's a bunch of different techniques, really good techniques out there. Some of them didn't work so well for me, but the technique I use and I've been using on probably the last dozen or two models I've made is really a simple, cost-effective technique that you can do with relatively easy to find materials, and it works fantastic. Okay, so I took a minute to lay out all the stuff that I have amassed over the years, and I have collected quite a few different products to help with the removal of print lines, or to achieve the removal of print lines. The one tried and true technique I keep going back to, and it works very well, is just using a standard 2K high build primer. You could get this at a local auto body supply store. It's also available online through Amazon. You could get it either in quarts or gallons. Now, the beauty of using this product is this product can be applied multiple different ways. I think people have a tendency to think when you're using an automotive product it has to be sprayed on, and that is not true. I brush this on, roll it on. You could put it on in you can spray it if you want, but you could put it on in many different fashions. It's a very high build, call it thick, high viscosity primer. Kind of eliminates your glazing compounds. Same thing with the resins, don't use them anymore. I really just stick to this. In the past, I've messed around with the final coat and trying different types of like off-the-shelf primer, and really haven't had a lot of luck with it. So I've stuck to some of the primers, and this is just one type. Eastwood makes a primer, Sem makes a primer, and these are high build spray primers. It's very similar to this type of primer, these types, in a spray form that's ready to be sprayed. And this really helps with the final coat. It's not necessary. This is fine if you don't want to invest in this. These are big cans, and they're about $20 to $30 a can, depending on where you get it. But these cans go a long way. The best part about this, I said you could put it on with a brush. I'm going to take you through real quick how to do it. It's very simple. You mix it up. Typically these are 4-to-1 mix, so you have your primer, and then you have your catalyst, your hardener. You mix 4 parts of your primer to 1 part of the catalyst and brush it on. It dries relatively quick. It's designed that way, so you could go ahead and get on with your next coat. This is, like I said, a very good primer, and I've had very good luck with it. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started, and I'll show you exactly how I do it. One last thing I have to mention, we'll go ahead and get started, is these are solvent-based chemicals. So make sure that you're wearing a respirator, and your safety glasses, and also a good pair of rubber gloves. Okay, to get us started, I'm using one of these painting cups. They're graduated cups. They're marked 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 8-to-1. Very common. You could get these actually at a local hardware store. They do sell them on Amazon. Art supply stores sell them also. So what we're doing with this primer, and you always read the directions because it could all be a little bit different, is we're going for 4-to-1. So what you do, let's see if I can turn this around. The primer will go in the cup real thick, and we're trying to get it up to that first mark. Okay, so that's our primer, and then we're going to use the reducer, and we take the second mark, so you can see that first mark, and then in the 4-to-1 you go to the 1 on the second mark, and that should give us our mix of 4-to-1. Okay, so I probably put a little bit too much in, but that's okay. This stuff's very easy to work with. Give it a good mix. And that's it. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this primer sit for about 5 minutes, start to activate, and then we'll go ahead and put the primer on. And as you can see, this primer's, it's nice and thick, and that's really what we're going for. You don't really want it too thick, but you want to keep it relatively thick because we're trying to fill in them print lines. This is the Iron Man mask I'm going to do. As you can see, if you look at this mask, I didn't sand any of the front. I didn't smooth anything. You could see a lot of lines in there. You can see a little bit of echoing. I did real quickly, probably took me less than 2-3 minutes, just hit this area real quick with a small orbital sander just to knock off. That's how I had the print oriented. So that's where the supports were. And you really want to just hit that, knock that off. You can do this just with regular sandpaper, just to get the high points, the points that are still sticking out, to get those knocked off. But you don't have to sand the rest of it. Like I said before, this primer, it really adheres to all types of plastics. I've never had a problem with getting it to adhere. Just get some primer on, make sure you get a nice thick coat of that primer. If you have areas like where these simulated bolts are, you could kind of brush around those a little bit. This primer will fill in any small details, so if you're doing something that has a lot of small details, you're going to want to kind of brush around some of those details. But in the areas like the brow here, I pat it on there and put it on real thick. It does shrink a little bit, so keep that in mind. But for the most part, this primer does very well. That's really it. Super simple. Leave it on. Doesn't have to be smooth, doesn't have to look good. Most of this coat's going to be getting sanded off anyways. And that's really it for this coat. All right, so now our primer's on and dry. We're going to go ahead and sand this first coat. I typically use this 3M, get it at a big box store, 150 grit to sand the first coat, and then we'll do a second coat after that. All right, so that looks really good. You can see just how well it covered in a lot of those lines. When you're sanding and you get to the plastic, you want to stop. Don't keep sanding through all the primer. That's pretty much done. Took about 10 minutes to sand the whole thing. Sands very, very easy. We're going to go ahead and put our second coat on. Now for the second coat, I typically use one of these. They're cheap. You could get them at the store, at a box store. Just an artist brush. It's just a wide flat brush. I'll try to put it on a little bit neater than I did on the first coat. Doesn't have to be perfect though, so if you splash some around or you get somewhere you didn't want it, you can always sand it back out. But just make sure we're doing this second coat, and this is primarily to fill in a lot of the sanding scratches because we used 150 grit sandpaper. So after this coat's done, we're going to go ahead and hit it with a 200 grit sandpaper, and because this coat's a little bit thinner, it'll dry a lot quicker than that first coat did. Just make sure you're getting in all the little areas, all the little cracks and recesses. Okay, so we let that second coat dry, let it dry for about 45 minutes. It's ready to be sanded. We're going to go ahead and sand it, and it doesn't take very long. Same thing, about 10 minutes. This time I'm going to sand it, use a little bit of wet dry paper. This is 3M paper. It is rated for sanding wet. Get a little bowl of clean water, and just like you were sanding the other piece, except you're going to put a little water. We're going to go ahead and just get this sanded. Same thing, try not to sand through all the primer on this coat, and you can see just how quickly this sands. It goes through it real quick, and right there you can see I'm already getting back down to the original layer of primer, so this sanding this coat should only take a couple minutes. Alright, that's pretty much it. You can see where I sanded this back down. As soon as you start getting back into the previous coats, into the plastic, you stop. As you do this, each coat should get progressively quicker and quicker to sand. This coat really, I only had about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more into sanding it. It doesn't take very much. Make sure you're cleaning your paper off a lot, dipping it in water and keeping it nice and wet. That'll keep it from building up and getting too much sanded material from loading up the paper. So that's really it. So we'll go ahead, get this dried off. I'm going to wipe it down with some rubbing alcohol real quick, and then we'll go ahead and put a coat of spray primer on it. Okay, so now that that's dry and we wiped it off, I'm going to give it a coat of this high build sandable primer. A few different manufacturers make it. SEM, I know Eastwood, you can order it on Amazon. And it's all this is really going to do is give us a thin coat that we can wet sand. And typically I'll wet sand that at with about a 400 grit. And for the most part, that's going to give me my final layer that I could put my base coat on. So we let that dry for about 10-15 minutes. This primer, this is that spray primer, dries real fast. Let it dry, got myself a fresh bowl of water. I get some of this 3M P400. I'm going to give it a quick sanding with that. If you were going to paint this flat or even like a semi-gloss, you're probably good. You can see there's absolutely no print lines in it. It looks really good. But since we're going to base coat it and then put a real nice high gloss clear on it, I'm going to go ahead, pretty much the same thing we did before when we did the 220. We're just going to give it a quick sand, keep the paper nice and wet, and go over that. It should only take about 10-15 minutes, and we want to get a nice smooth finish to apply our base on. So there it is, relatively easy, didn't take very long, about 10 minutes. Wet sanding with a 400 grit sandpaper, just went over it lightly, try not to sand through into all the previous layers. A couple spots that may have sanded through a little bit, especially on the edges, could possibly transfer over when you're putting your base coat on. So what I'll do is typically just grab that primer I used before and put a light dusting of that primer across the whole mask before I put the base coat on. Let it dry for about 5 minutes, and then you're good enough to go ahead and do your base coat. All right, just wanted to take a minute and go through things here and close this out. This is the mask. This is done, painted. I used a little bit of just regular silver rattle can paint that I had lying around extra, put a couple coats of automotive clear coat on it. I'm planning on making another video showing you pretty much how I put the base and the clear coat on. So if you guys like the video, hit the like button. I'll go ahead and put something together on that. As you can see though, there's absolutely no layer lines. This process works very well. One thing I didn't talk about earlier, I talked a little bit about the price of these box store or over the shelf kind of rattle cans of primer. Usually about $8 to $10 a can. You know, when you're talking about this automotive style primer, you're looking at about $100 for a setup. Now that's 5 quarts, so you'll have your 4 quarts of primer plus your quart of activator hardener. And if you think about it, I used for doing this mask and the helmet, I used about 1.5 ounces. So this really does go a long way. I think I've had this gallon, I'm getting finally down towards the end of it, and I think I've had this gallon for pretty close to a year and a half now, and I've done quite a bit of things, including full-size Iron Man suit, a full-size R2-D2, quite a bit of helmets, a lot of stuff with this. So this does really go a long way. It is much cheaper than this. Also, you can also mix it in a little bit different consistencies. You can reduce it if you want to spray it. If you want to brush it on like we did in the video, that works fantastic. Any way that you're going to go about smoothing a print is going to require a little bit of elbow grease. This just makes it a lot easier. This stuff sands very nice, very akin to sanding like a drywall mud. Just real easy, paper cuts through it nice, and it really is designed to be sanded. So hey, if you guys like the video, please hit like. I'll put some more videos out there on finishing prints, and you know, the way that you know, I finish them doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way, but it works for me, and I hope you guys try it and enjoy it. And if you do, please let me know in the comments. Thank you.